taking up press pages across the world, and one that we're seeing a lot of analysis on is the commemoration of the death of Martin Luther King, now 50 years ago. A comment piece, Diptika, in the Times saying, really, we need to remember more than his courage and elegance.
It's a really interesting piece. In fact, the iconic civil rights leader passed away 50 years ago while he was delivering his famous I Have a Dream speech in Memphis. In a way, at least for the British daily The Times, Dr. King had already been walking in the shadow of death for a decade before. Indeed, when JFK was killed, Dr. King had told his wife that he believed he too would suffer the same fate. The Times does hail Dr. King's restraint, his defiance, and courage in the face of adversity. They also say he showed us how to handle populist hate, although I'm not quite sure we really are handling it these days anyway. Perhaps Dr. King's civil rights movement continues on today, though, through the Black Lives Matter movement. That's according to a geopolitics specialist interviewed by L'Humanité. Charlotte Roquequion says the movement that was born during the Obama era in 2013 had a lot in common with the civil rights movement, notably this desire to bring closer together black communities.
So the Times, they're saying King showed us how to handle populist hate half a century after his assassination. Now, you've also found an interesting read written by the journalist who was actually one of the few people on the scene after his death.
You'll see his name is Earl Caldwell. There's actually a photo in the New York Times of him just trailing Martin Luther King. There's that photo there. That's an iconic photo. That's one for the history books. He's still alive, at the time, a young, ambitious black reporter, which in itself was a pretty big feat given the times that we were living in at that time. He'd been assigned to follow Dr. King in Memphis in 1958. His brief was follow him, stay in the same hotel. The idea was to follow him in the Deep South at a time of racial tensions, of course. And basically, at the time, Dr. King was due to speak to striking trash collectors. So it was pretty simple brief at the time. Well, Caldwell writes in the New York Daily News that he'd been on the day before Martin Luther King's assassination, he'd been with him on the very balcony where he died. He also puts his own spin on what he thinks and may have really happened and who may have been behind it. But you can read all about that in the New York Daily News.
Okay, an interesting one and an interesting photo. Let's move on to India now. Papers there have been following the plight of a famed jeweller who's on the run after being implicated in a fraud scandal.
It's an extraordinary story. It's been picked up in the last days and weeks by the Indian papers. This time it's the Straits Times, which is a Singaporean paper, so in the region, that tells a story about Nirav Modi. Now, he is a Belgian-born jeweler who awed his peers with his billion-dollar empire, bejeweling Hollywood actresses and brushing shoulders with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. There is no relation between the two men. Well, now he's on the run after a state-run Indian bank told regulators that it had found nearly $2 billion worth of fraudulent transactions linked back to his bank accounts. As the paper reports, finding the fugitive now has become a national pastime in India. People camping out in front of hotels where they think he may be or where he may be rumored to be, trying to see if they can get a glimpse of one of India's most wanted men now. It has also done very little to inspire confidence in state-run banks in India, already a country sort of buckling under the pressure of several corruption scandals.
And also from India, but a very different topic. India is, of course, one of many countries participating in the Commonwealth Games, and they kick off this Wednesday on the Gold Coast of Australia.
The Commonwealth Games brings together all the current and former colonies of the British Empire as they compete for sporting glory. India is one of them, Australia as well, which is the host. They're hosting it on the Gold Coast. There's a lot of anticipation for these games. This one will be the first without Usain Bolt in the 100-meter men's sprint, leaving the path really wide open to his competitors. The youngest competitor is from Wales. Her name is Anne Hersey. She's 11 years old, and she's part of the Welsh table tennis team competing on the Gold Coast. The Guardian explains it'll also be the most gender-equal games with the same number of medal events for men and women. And another person to look out for, Malaysia's Nicole David. She's seeking a third gold medal in squash. She's actually been called the Serena Williams of the sport.
Okay, good to watch. And we'll see if those female games get just as much coverage as the male ones. But good to know there's just as many to watch. And meanwhile, you were mentioning there she's competing in Australia, but in her home country of Malaysia, there is a culinary controversy brewing in the version of Masterchef, the cooking show.
So this, that's right, the US version of Masterchef aired featuring a Malaysian contestant. She was booted off after delivering her version of the Malaysian-Indonesian coconut curry called rendang. Her version with chicken was eliminated because judges said the chicken wasn't crispy enough. They called her dish a, quote, mistake, and she was promptly eliminated from the show. This set Malaysian social media users on fire. They've slammed the British judges for dishonoring their iconic national dish, saying it's a stew and by definition the chicken should not be crispy, it should be soft and tender, cooked in its sauces. It's even drawn the ire of Malaysia's Prime Minister, who tweeted rather sarcastically saying, "Where do you find people eating crispy chicken rendang?" While one user in one of my favorite tweets said, I quote, "If you want crispy chicken, the judges should go to KFC."
Well, there, oh my God, it just shows you UK MasterChef, take that. Diptyque Laurent, thanks a lot for that wrap-up of the international papers.